Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another Spotlight Talk presented by Historic Beverly. Today's talk is a little different than our usual talks in that we're not going to be discussing an object, but rather an event, the archaeological excavation that took place at the Balch House in 1998. We're going to be discussing a little history of the Balch House and then dig into what the dig itself uncovered. Essex County has a rich history of prehistoric archaeological heritage dating back over 10,000 years, as evidenced by numerous Paleo-Indian, contact period, and tool manufacturing sites discovered in the area. So it's not surprising that the Balch House has an archaeological story to tell. The Balch House sits on elevated terrain overlooking the Wenham Lake Bass River drainage, which appears to have been an important prehistoric thoroughfare. Now, it's important to remember also that 17th century colonists had many of the same prerequisites for choosing a site for their homes and buildings as prehistoric people did. So there is a high correlation between early colonial sites and prehistoric sites. Now, throughout the home's history as a homestead, the property remained in the Balch family and their heirs. Born in Bridgewater, Somerset, England in 1579, John and his wife came to New England with the Dorchester Company as part of a venture to establish a fishing industry. The company first landed in Weymouth in 1623, but moved to Gloucester a year later. The settlement there was not successful, and the company was recalled to England. The Balches, along with others, stayed and moved south to Naumkeag, which is now Salem, in 1626. In 1635, John Balch was one of 5 settlers granted 200 acres of land as part of the 1,000-acre grant. The land was granted on the Bass River side of what was still Salem town. Now, after the death of John, the house passed to his son Benjamin, and from him it went to his grandson, Benjamin Balch III. Although he only inherited 26 acres out of the original 200-acre farm. As elsewhere in late 17th and 18th century eastern Massachusetts, the growing population meant the rapid division of originally large farmsteads into much smaller parcels. When Benjamin III died in 1759, the house passed out of the male line, but remained in the family as it became the property of Benjamin III's grandson, Cornelius Dodge. Dodge continued to farm the land with occasional help from his eldest son, Azor Dodge, who was primarily a carpenter and had a small carpenter shop just southeast of the house. By the time Cornelius died and Azor inherited the land, the farm had been reduced to 8 total acres. Following Azor's death, the property passed to his widowed daughter-in-law, Mary Dodge, and his granddaughter, Addie Dodge. Now, as a widower with a young child to support, the family fell on hard times, and Mary began renting out parts of the house to a string of tenants. In 1916, the Balch House Trust was formed and secured the house for the Balch Family Association. The house remained vacant from 1917 to 1920, and from 1920 to 21 operated as a tea room and a gift shop. And although the site is remarkable for its early date of construction, it is also impressive in that it represents such a sense of continuity on the landscape, while so much around it changed. From the early 17th century through 1916, the house remained the property of the Balch and Dodge family, and for most of that time remained a farm. Meanwhile, Beverly was undergoing tremendous change. Land was subdivided, farms gave way to factories. In 1840, the Eastern Railroad built a line through the backyard of the house. In the early 20th century, the USMC built its massive factory nearby on what had been part of the original 200-acre farm. So that is the historical background of the Balch House. Now you may be asking yourself, why was a dig conducted at the Balch House? The answer is that the Beverly Historical Society requested it. At the time, there was an idea to create a replica historic garden in the front yard of the Balch house. The goal of the dig was to answer the question, were there intact archaeological resources that would be endangered by the development of a garden in this area? And the answer was a resounding yes. The excavation uncovered intact early colonial features, as well as prehistoric Native American finds. The dig also uncovered a substantial number of artifacts from the 17th through 20th centuries. Since there are few artifacts remaining from the Balch family in the Historic Beverly collection, these artifacts help to provide a clearer picture of the lives of these individuals. Now seen here is a photograph of the dig itself. Remember, it took place in 1998, and some of the volunteers can be seen sifting through material looking for artifacts here. Now the excavation produced a series of features. In archaeology, a feature is defined as a non-movable element of an archaeological site. There were several features found on the site that we're going to discuss. Some of these were from major episodes of construction in the 20th century, but others dated to the colonial period, and 3 potentially could be considered prehistoric. Now seen here is an excavation map of the front yard of the Balch house and some of the findings the dig produced. 20th century features found on the site included a builder's trench, which likely dates to the 1950s when a foundation was placed under the house. This trench contained a mix of artifacts that dated from the 17th through 20th centuries. And additional 20th century features included a water main, a gas main, and a garden border. There were also significant colonial features found on the site as well. Emerson Baker, who directed the dig, argues that perhaps the most significant feature found on the site was feature 19, which is indicated by the yellow arrow here on this map, and it was apparently a fire pit. The feature is a concentration of rock, which could appear to be in a circular pattern. We don't know for sure, as the full extent of the feature was not excavated. Some charcoal was found mixed between the rocks, as well as several colonial artifacts, indicating that it is a historic rather than prehistoric feature. It's located less than 10 feet away from the southern end, which is the newer end of the Balch house, telling us that the feature must predate the construction of that end of the house, as no one would want to have an open fire that close to the outer wall of a wooden house. It would seem safe to say that feature 19 is a 17th century one. Another intriguing colonial feature was feature 20, indicated by the green arrow, which was a post hole. This post hole showed signs of burning and also contained some burnt wattle and daub, which was the infilling used on houses in the 17th century. This construction technique was abandoned in the early 18th century, which tells us that this post represents early Balch occupation on the property. This feature is located just 9 feet from the front of the Balch house and possibly represents a part of the house that was removed, perhaps even after it was partially burnt. An alternative is that the post was part of a house that was built and burned down prior to the construction of the Balch house, which now stands. 2 facts support this theory. One being that the post is located so close to the Balch house and shows signs of burning, it would seem likely that a fire in this area would have consumed the entire house. 2 is that the later date of construction attributed to the Balch house, making it likely that the original house burnt down and a new house was constructed at a later date. There was also a possibly prehistoric storage pit uncovered and known as feature 22, shown by the red arrow. This feature was small and circular in shape. In this pit, 2 prehistoric flakes and 2 small bone fragments were found. In the stratum, which are the layers of soil, above these finds, a total of 461 additional artifacts were uncovered in this excavation pit. The lack of historic artifacts found in the feature, but such concentration of historic artifacts above it very strongly suggests that the feature itself is prehistoric. Now, the heaviest concentration of artifacts was found in the excavation pits less than 10 feet away from the house. This is not surprising, considering that early colonial sites are noted by the scatter of artifacts just outside doors and windows. It's important to remember that trash pits were rare in early New England, and so instead, most people simply just threw their garbage out the front door. We're now going to take a look at some of the artifacts uncovered during the excavation. Now, a variety of artifacts were uncovered during the excavation, and they can be grouped into a variety of different classes: foodways, personal, structural, and commercial and trade artifacts. We're going to take a look at some of the artifacts that the dig produced. Now, bear in mind that this dig resulted in thousands of artifacts being uncovered. So what we're going to see today is just a very small portion of them. As any archaeologist will tell you, clay tobacco pipe stems are a great tool for dating of sites. Smoking tobacco became immensely popular in the late 16th century, and tobacco pipes were mass-produced out of clay by pipe makers in England and the Netherlands. Pipes were cheap and easily broken, and they often littered 17th century sites, making them the colonial equivalent of today's cigarette butts. Archaeologists recognize that the borehole on clay tobacco pipes decreases over time, and, as we can see on this slide, certain bore sizes are attributed to different date ranges. Although individual pipes cannot be so precisely dated, when these items are examined as a whole, they give a good idea of the date of a site through the use of the Binford formula, which is a mathematical formula that, using data and distribution patterns, provides a single date that reflects the middle of the site's occupation period. The Binford date for the Balch house is 1731. The pipe stem distribution reflects the long occupation of the property at the by the Balch family. It is notable, however, that there are very few stems which date to 1680 or earlier. Now, aside from the clay tobacco pipes, few artifacts that can be classified as personal were excavated. Now, seen here are 6 pipe stem fragments that were excavated from the Balch house. As these pieces broke off of the pipe, they would have been disposed of, as we said, much like cigarette butts were today. Here we see a pipe bowl fragment made of pipe clay with a floral decoration. Pipe bowl fragments are not as commonly found as pipe stem fragments. Now here we see 2 pieces of a clay smoking pipe that was recovered. The bore diameter on this pipe is 4/64, meaning it likely dates to after 1740. The stem features a mark that notes 78 and Glasgow, although the writing is very difficult to discern. Because the pipe features the city of Glasgow rather than the country of Scotland, it is likely that the piece predates 1891, which is when the USA mandated that all foreign imports must be marked by the country of origin. Now, another common find at the Balch archaeology dig were ceramics. And of course, ceramics are one of the most common finds on any archaeology site. During the Balch excavation, 3,517 pottery shards of ceramic were recovered. Now, 2 different classes of ceramics were found on the sites: utilitarian wares and tablewares. Utilitarian earthenwares, like these green glazed fragments, accounted for 66% of the ceramics found at the site. Earthenware is a class of pottery that is known for its soft, water-absorbent body that is made impermeable by glazing. Utilitarian wares are principally earthenwares or redwares, such as seen here with black glaze, and are used in the preparation and storage of foodstuffs. Now, in contrast to utilitarian wares, tablewares are more refined pieces of pottery, and make up the plates, cups, and serving pieces used to consume food and beverages. They comprised 34% of ceramics found on site. The majority of these tablewares are whitewares, which consist of creamware, pearlware, ironstone, and hard yellow. Creamware was invented in 1762 and truly revolutionized the ceramic industry, becoming the dominant ware for several decades. Pearlware was an effort to make creamware more white and was introduced in 1779 and would ultimately supplant creamware as the most popular ware, although they both did remain fairly popular throughout the 1840s. 87% of the tableware excavated from the Balch site were whitewares, indicating that a large percentage of the artifacts excavated from the site date to the second half of the 18th century and the first third of the 19th century. Pre-creamware tablewares accounted for less than 5% of the ceramics found on site. What was found on site were a typical range of 18th century finds, including Jackfield type refined earthenware, which dates from 1720 to 1780, white English salt glazed stoneware, dating from 1720 to 75, Nottingham stoneware, which dates from 1700 to 1775, clouded ware, dating from 1740 to 1770, combed yellow slipware, which dates from 1675 to 1775, and Westerwald stoneware, which we can see here is a fragment with blue glaze on it. Westerwald stoneware dates from 1650 to 1775. Also found were tin enameled ware and Chinese export porcelain. Now, this difference may reflect a different disposal pattern in use in the first half of the 18th century, as opposed to later on, when much more trash shows up in the front yard. White English salt glaze was a major advance in English pottery, coming closer to the ideals of pure white and also thinness of body, and very imitative of Chinese export porcelain, which is seen here. Another rare find from the site was a Nottingham stoneware fragment, seen here. This was a brown English stoneware that was also used for tablewares, particularly mugs. As with other object classes, it is surprising just how few diagnostic 17th century tablewares, or indeed ceramics, are found on site. Very little tin enameled ware was recovered, and this would have been the most popular tableware in New England in the 17th century. The most common early New England ceramic was combed yellowware and was not introduced in New England until after 1675. It should be pointed out, though, that not all of the Balch's early utilitarian wares and tablewares would have been ceramic and thus would show up in the archaeological record. For example, John Balch's 1648 inventory refers to pewter. Now, pewter quickly rots in the ground and rarely shows up in archaeological assemblages, while silver is very rarely left behind because of its value. His inventory also refers to woodenware, which is a reminder that wooden bowls, trays, and trenchers were used in food preparation and as tableware. While the earthenware ceramics remain, woodware would have rotted long ago. In addition to ceramics and glass bottles, faunal remains can also provide important clues about food and diet. A total of 1,152 bone fragments were excavated in 1998. Of these, 408 were calcine bone, and a very preliminary analysis revealed cow and pig remains, suggesting that the Balch family's diet was typical for their time. A total of 98 shell fragments were recovered, including both clam and oyster shell. A more detailed analysis could be made to examine for other animal species and to learn more about dietary patterns of the Balches. Now, in the colonial era, all cooking was done on an open hearth, utilizing a spit, kettles, and cookpots. Stews and porridges were very common, making kettles particularly important. Several pieces of sheet copper presumably come from a copper kettle that were found, and 2 pieces of an iron kettle were also found. Perhaps most excitingly, an iron 2-tined fork was excavated. The fork had a tang, which originally would have had a bone or a wooden handle, and now forks were a real rarity in 17th century New England, although in the 18th century, iron 2-tined forks did become a common piece of everyday tableware. But we can see from the image here, it is still remarkably intact. Now, structural artifacts are among the most common finds on colonial sites, and the Balch House site is no exception, even though the Balch House is still standing. Brick fragments were found throughout the site, though generally small fragments and in small quantities. Likewise, only a small quantity of daub was found on site. Now, as we mentioned earlier, daub is the mix of clay, straw, and manure that was the infilling for walls in timber-framed houses. It was applied to a weave of sticks, known as a wattle, and placed between the posts and stud of a timber frame. Daub is always almost present on a 17th century site that has burned. For as the house burns, the daub itself partially fires, turning it into a brick-like material. If brick and daub were lacking, nails were numerous on the site. 671 hand-forged nails, 226 cut nails, and 273 wire nails were recovered. Nails were most heavily distributed close to the Balch House, and as such, they are clear evidence of numerous rounds of repairs and renovations to the house. The majority of the nails were less than 1.5 inches in length, suggesting that they were used in replacing clapboards and shingles. And seen here are 5 wire iron roofing nails with round heads and stems that would have been used for just such a job. Additionally, numerous 1-inch galvanized roofing nails were also found. Nails were hand-forged prior to the development of nail factories in 1790, and as handmade objects, they could be expensive, so nails can be an indicator of wealth in the 17th century. Still, nails are found in substantial quantities even on most sites, except for those that were occupied by the very, very poor. Cut nails were gradually replaced by wire nails around the turn of the 20th century. While the wire nails are indicative of the 20th century restoration of the house, the large number of cut nails also indicates that repairs and renovations took place in the 19th century as well. What we have explored today is just a small sample of the objects found during the dig and the stories these artifacts can tell us. Other artifacts hint at the broad range of work and activities that took place on a colonial homestead. 6 pieces of gun flint, a broken flint, and a complete flint all testify to the need for firearms in early America. The flints are both span type, suggesting they may have even been made on site. A lead musket ball was also recovered. A broken codfish hook suggests that members of the family at least occasionally fished for their meals. 2 glass beads and part of a black bead could also have been used for clothing, or they could have been items for trade with Native Americans. These finds could even be from a Native American occupation of the property in the contact period. There are no diagnostic Native American finds to suggest the site was occupied in this era. However, as we mentioned, many early settlers did choose to occupy sites recently abandoned by Native Americans. When the Native Americans had left, they left behind cleared farmlands and sometimes even standing wigwams that the English could use for temporary shelter. Although coins are rarely found on archaeology sites, commerce is represented on the Balch site by a total of 5 19th and early 20th century coins. 2 1881 and 1 1882 Indian head pennies were excavated, as well as a buffalo nickel. The oldest coin was an 1806 US half penny. A brass straight pin and 2 copper thimbles suggest the extensive making, altering, and repairing of clothes. 2 unglazed clay marbles remind us that people enjoyed play as well as work. While it is tempting to think that marbles are a sign of children at play, marbles have also frequently shown up in Revolutionary War barracks and colonial forts, suggesting that colonial adults, as well as children, enjoyed a game of marbles. Now, the single most important research question to answer was the archaeological sensitivity of the front yard of the Balch house. Despite modern renovations, landscaping, and utility trenching, were there intact archaeological resources that would be endangered by the development of a garden in this area? As we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the answer is yes. There are significant archaeological resources here, including intact early colonial features and even a scatter of prehistoric finds. Even the areas disturbed by construction contain redeposited materials that are important for interpretation of the Balch House as a historic house museum. The dig uncovered a substantial number of artifacts ranging in date from the 17th through the 20th centuries. This information can be particularly useful for Historic Beverly, as there are few objects in the house that actually have historical association with the Balch family. As such, the artifacts can help with future interpretive plans for the Balch House. Perhaps the most significant discovery made during the dig was the fact that the site was first occupied as long as 3,000 years ago. The long tenure of the Balch family on the property, combined with this prehistoric occupation, makes the Balch site a unique place where the story of Beverly, and indeed the story of the North Shore, can be told from prehistory and first settlers to present. Thank you very much for attending today's Spotlight program. If you enjoyed this program and you'd like to continue to support future programming, please text to give by texting HistBev to the number 443-21. You can also support us by becoming a member of Historic Beverly at the link on your screen. We highly encourage you to check out our YouTube channel, Historic Beverly, for additional digital content. I also encourage you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, Historic Beverly, so that you can keep up to date with all of our great upcoming events, as well as our fun social media posts that we have out there. If you have any questions about anything that you have seen today, I highly encourage you to reach out to us at research@historicbeverly.net, and we really truly look forward to seeing you at programming in the future. Again, thank you for watching this talk. We look forward to seeing you again. Check out our website and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Take care. Bye-bye.